Thank you for clicking this video. This is Mujola Oluwa and you're welcome to Battle with Ola. On this episode, we want to talk about void marriages. We've done several videos on marriages in Nigeria. In fact, on this channel, we have a dedicated playlist on everything regarding marriages. We've talked about customary marriage, we've talked about statutory marriages, we've talked about dissolution of marriages and several other things. And in the coming weeks and months, we're going to be talking about more other aspects of marriages, as required or as prescribed by law. But today I want to talk about void marriages. What's a void marriage? A void marriage is a marriage that was no marriage at all in the eye of the law. That is, in the eye of the law, both parties were never even married. In Hyde and Woodmansey, it's a locus classicus for definition of marriage, although in recent times, in contemporary times, there have been arguments, saying that Hyde is no longer the locus for defining marriages because of different variations of marriages that we have now. But we're not going to be talking about that in this video. In Nigeria at the moment, Hyde still operates. What does Hyde say? Hyde defines marriage as the union between a man and a wife for life to the exclusion of all others. So a union between a man and a wife under the law for life to the exclusion of others. So that's a marriage. So if we say marriage is void, what we are saying is that that union never existed before the law. And there are certain things that you should look out for to know if a marriage is void or not. If a marriage is void, you might not even need to go to court. The marriage stands annulled because it is void. But if you want to fulfill all righteousness, you might have to go to court for a decree of annulment just to get a decree that that marriage is void ab initio, that is void from the beginning and was never a marriage to start with. So how do you know that a marriage is void? Let me read to you a portion of the decision in De Renville and De Renville. There, the court distinguished between a void marriage and a voidable marriage. A void marriage means that the marriage was never in existence in the eye of the law. But a voidable marriage means that the marriage is voidable. That is, if one party wakes up and decides, oh, this other party has done this or done that, or such condition exists, which makes the marriage voidable. And then I want to awaken the power of the law to declare the marriage void, then the person will go to court to void the marriage. So a voidable marriage means that if a party says they want to actually void the marriage, they can go void it. But a void marriage means that the marriage was void ab initio, that is, from the beginning there was no marriage. Let me just read the provision of the decision of the court to you so that you will understand better. In another video, we're going to be talking about voidable marriages, but today we're talking about void marriages. So in De Renville and De Renville, it's a 1949 case. The court said, and I read, a void marriage is one that will be regarded by every court in any case in which the existence of the marriage is in issue as never having taken place, and can be so treated by both parties to it without the necessity of any decree annulling it. A voidable marriage is one that will be regarded by every court as a valid subsisting marriage until a decree annulling it has been pronounced by a court of competent jurisdiction. So essentially what this provision or what this decision is saying is that for void marriages, you don't even need to go to court or anything. Just pack your bags and move on with your life. There was never a marriage. Once you identify the factor that makes it void, which we're going to be talking about. But for voidable marriages, one of the parties has to go to court to get a decree voiding the marriage on certain basis. That's when it becomes void. But it doesn't become void just because. But a void marriage is void just because. So what are the things you look out for to know if a marriage is void ab initio, that is void from the beginning? The first pointer to a void marriage, which we're going to be talking about today, is the existence of another valid marriage. So I'm going to be reading to you the portion of the Matrimonial Causes Act which provides this. Marriages in Nigeria are largely governed by the Marriage Act and the Matrimonial Causes Act of 1970. So in section 33, it says, subsection 1, no marriage in Nigeria shall be valid where either of the parties thereto at the time of the celebration of such marriage is married by native law or custom to any person other than the person with whom such marriage is had. So if a party is already married to another person by native law and custom, let's say Olu now. Olu is already married to Shade. under native law and custom. That is, Olu has a customary marriage with Shade, and Olu now goes on to marry Bola, under the law, that is maybe at the registry, statutory marriage. That marriage is void, even though it was celebrated. They've signed the papers and all of that. Once once Bola realizes that Olu was hitherto married to Shade under customary law, her marriage to Olu is void. She can just pack her bags and go. So the law restores both parties to status quo ante bellum. That is, the law restores them to the position where they were before they got married. That means the marriage never existed. So that means that if you're married to someone in Nigeria under native law and custom or under the act, you cannot marry a different person while that marriage or those marriages subsist. So those marriages must have ended or should not even be in existence before you can say you want to marry someone under the act in Nigeria. So the existence of a valid marriage, whether it's customary marriage or a marriage under the act to another person, voids a marriage that comes after. So that marriage is void ab initio. However, if Olu marries Bola under native law and custom and much later decides to marry the same Bola under the act, that is statutory marriage registry, the marriage will not be void. It will be valid because they are the same parties. Remember, Eid and Eid says the union of a man and a woman, same man, same woman. So if they are the same parties who have celebrated a customary marriage and they are now celebrating a statutory marriage, it will be valid. But if it's customary to a different person or statutory to a different person and now statutory with another person, this second marriage coming after will be void ab initio. The second factor that voids a marriage in Nigeria is prohibited degrees of consanguinity and affinity. You'll find that in section 3, first schedule, and section 115 subsection 1 of the Matrimonial Causes Act of 1970. Please read it. That means that prohibited degrees of consanguinity means that if you're related to someone by blood, you cannot marry them validly in Nigeria. That marriage will be void. And prohibited degrees of affinity means that if you're related to someone by marriage, you cannot marry them validly. That is, maybe your in-laws to certain extents. Please read that law. Makes provisions for those sets of people that you cannot marry. So if you marry any of these sets of people to whom you are related by blood or by affinity by marriage, the marriage will be void ab initio. In the eye of the law, it will be as though you were never married. So you can ask for a decree of annulment or you can just go your separate ways. The marriage never existed. Another thing that is very important in celebration of marriages that will be valid under the law, that is statutory marriage in Nigeria, is lex loci celebrationis. That's the law of the place of celebration of marriage. So if the celebration of the marriage does not comply with the lex loci celebrationis, it will likely be void. It will be void ab initio. Lex loci celebrationis would be that the prescribed form of marriage. If you check the Matrimonial Causes Act, it will tell you how the instances and the steps to be taken before a marriage can be said to have been celebrated validly. If those steps, those guidelines are not followed in total, the marriage will be void ab initio. And the one that looks like it is the place of celebration of marriage. Now, in Nigeria, marriages are under the act are usually celebrated at the registry or at an approved location or at a licensed place of worship. Even if you want to do garden wedding in Nigeria for marriage under the act, it must be licensed, by the registrar of marriages. It must be licensed. Not that you just go to a garden or to a public place and say that you're doing marriage under the act. No, it must be licensed. So if you're using a licensed place of worship, that is your church now, for instance, it can't be just any church. The church, you must be certain that the church has a license to wed people under the law. If not, you would have celebrated what we call church blessing. That would be all. And in that instance, the law cannot preside over that marriage. That is, you can't come to court for a dissolution much later, because in the eye of the law, you were never even married. So make sure that if you're doing your wedding at a church, your marriage at a church, you're celebrating your marriage, that's the wedding at a church, make sure that that place is a licensed place of worship. Or you can go to the registry or ask the registrar of marriage to license a place for you where you can celebrate the wedding, and then it will be a valid marriage. Now, if you're using a licensed place of worship, it is the church pastor that must join the couple. So you can have maybe invited ministers and all of that, do some other things on the program. Whenever I go for a wedding, I look out for these things. I mean, why wouldn't I? So it must be the pastor of that licensed place of worship, the person, the presiding minister that is licensed, at that licensed place of worship to join parties. He must be the one that does the joining. That is when the marriage is valid. Please take note. And when you go to the registry, the registrar of marriage must be the one that will join you, that will pronounce you man and wife. Once that is done, the marriage is valid. But if not, so we've talked about two things: the law of the place of celebration, lex loci celebrationis, and we have talked about the place of celebration, that is, the registrar of marriage or the minister, presiding minister, that is licensed to join couples in marriage. So those things must be done. If not, the marriage will be void ab initio. That is, in the eye of the law, no marriage. And the last thing we're going to be talking about today is failure to obtain consent. Consent is very key in marriage. Even in customary marriage, you know that consent is key, parental consent especially, and all of that. But for marriages under the Act, we're talking about consent of both parties. That is, both parties must agree, must know that they want to get married, and they must agree to a marriage. Not that one party will think, oh, we are going to play golf, and the other party is actually taking them to go and get them married. So no deception, no fraud, no duress, no misrepresentation. So the two parties getting married must have consented to the celebration of the marriage, to getting married under the law. That's the only time it will be valid. If not, if a party complains or a party can prove that they were fraudulently led into the marriage, or they were led into the marriage or joined under duress, the marriage will be declared void and it will be annulled. Or if there has been misrepresentation, the marriage will be void. For instance, in Corbett and Corbett, a she got married and could not consummate the marriage, and then the other party came and filed for annulment of the marriage, saying that there was misrepresentation. So this she, a woman who had converted to a man, but whose conversion was not thoroughly successful, or was it a man who had converted to a woman? Now read Corbett and Corbett. But the conversion was not successful, and then he married a person of another sex, and it was supposed to be a valid marriage, but they could not consummate the marriage. And then it turned out that the sex change was not actually carried out, it was not successful. So this person was still the same sex that they were before, and so they had misrepresented themselves. The other party was claiming that they had misrepresented themselves, held themselves out to be of another sex, and that's why the marriage went on. So there was misrepresentation, and they were calling on the court to annul the marriage and declare the marriage void. So if there's fraud, if there's duress, if there's misrepresentation, consent cannot be said to have taken place, and so the marriage will be void. These are the instances where a marriage will be void in Nigeria. So check your marriage, or if you're about to get married, look out for these things. When you go to weddings, when you have people that are getting married around you, check these things for them, so that you know, or they would know, if a marriage, or if the marriage is void or is voidable even, and so that both parties can do the needful. That's all I have for you in this video. I will see you in my very next video. Don't forget to subscribe to those.